The Renaissance was developed during the 1450 to the 16th centuries. It is the next historical period that marks the passing of European society from a predominantly religious orientation to a more secular one, and from an age of unquestioning faith in good to one of belief in reason and specific inquiry. This is what is called the passing from the theocentrism, which was the focal point of thoughts, interests, and feelings, to the anthropocentrism, which was the means to be the final aim and end of the universe. The term suggests a sudden rebirth of learning and art after presumed restoration of the Middle Ages. It is the new humanism that inaugurates the modern age, beginning in Italy and spreading to the rest of Europe by the 16th century. Its influence affects literature, philosophy, art, politics, science, religion, and other aspects of intellectual inquiry. Renaissance scholars employed the humanism method in study and search for realism and human emotion in art like a cultural movement. It meant a resurgence of learning based on classical sources, the only method to recover human values. The most important music of the early Renaissance was composed for use by the church. Polyphonic was made up of several simultaneous melodies, masses and motets in Latin for important churches and court chapels. Musical offerings include motets and masses from church and chapel services, many of whose large musical offerings were based on existing Gregorian chants. During the Renaissance, the church underwent internal turmoil that broke the unity of Christianism. The Catholic Church reacted against Protestantism, which the so-called Counter-Reformation, and continued with its rich musical tradition. The Protestant Reformation. In Germany, Martin Luther broke away with Rome in years 1510, establishing Protestantism. His high musical training allowed him to create the chorale, main musical form of his church. It was a simple composition often based on popular melodies with a homophonic texture. The English Reformation. In England, Henry VIII broke away with Rome in the year 1534, creating the Anglican Church and proclaiming himself the head of it. It was used the anthem, eliminating the mass. The anthem is a composition similar to the motet, written for four voices and in English. The Catholic Counter-Reformation. The Catholic Church kept the Gregorian chant as the official singing for the church, but also developed polyphony, which reached its utmost splendor. The motet was the most important from the religious polyphony. In Latin and brief, it avoids the previous counterpoint complexity because the rule of music in the church was not to please the ear, but to help the devout attune their souls towards good. The Mass was a compound musical form, result of putting together all the pieces of the liturgy, which can be composed of as a motet or by means of different techniques of imitation and variation. The most important composers of the Counter-Reformation were Giovanni Pierluigi da Palestrina, 1525 to 1594, Orlando di Lasso, 1531 to 1594, and the Spanish Cristobal Morales, 15 to 1553, and Tomás Luis de Victoria, 1548 to 1611.
Renaissance characteristics. In the Renaissance music, vocal music, as in the Middle Ages, was more important than instrumental music. The humanistic interest in language influenced vocal music. Renaissance composers wrote music to exchange the meaning and emotion of the text. This is called word paintings. The reading in this style is simple and has a clever beat, called tactus, and was adapted to human breath. The texture is chiefly polyphonic and was based in the continuous limitation among voices. Another style was homophonic texture, with succession of chords. It was used in dance. Renaissance choral music didn't need instrumental music. For this reason, was called the Golden Age of a cappella.
Genders. Sacred music. The two main forms of sacred music are the motet and the mass. They are equal in style, but the mass is longer in composition. The mass has form by cantus firmus, which is fixed melody of a fragment of a Gregorian chant. Sometimes the cantus firmus was taken from a popular song and was called parody mass, Gloria and Credo. The Renaissance motet is a polyphonic choral work set up to a scarce Latin text. The secular music means non-religious music, the music of the privileged classes, the nobility and the rich people. From the union of the poetry and the music, there are two important secular genders, the madrigal Italian and the French chanson. The madrigal is formed of 4 or 5 voices with compact polyphonic texture. It reflects the sense and meaning of the text by using expressive elements like madrigalism. The composers developed opitoria and express writing to an extraordinary degree. The most important were the Orlandi di Lasso, Gualdo and Claudio Mattei. You can hear this beautiful piece that transmits your happiness, movement, and motion, written on Italian. The French chanson. Chanson forms polyphonic texture and instrument component. Use music tone modes like the sings of the birds, natural effect, hands or one extends. When we listen to this, there are a constant rhythm. It is quickly piece written on French. There are silence, not as religious music, and you can hear the natural effect. Also, here we have the Spanish villancico. For us, this is the most important because it is European, based on traditional melodies. Dance melodies are homophonic, made by 4 voices and simple songs. It is characterized by repeat the melody using instruments. We can perceive that it repeated some pieces. The instruments. For this period, the instruments were very important because it were a specific composition form of instruments and pieces. But only instruments are used on secular music and not on the chart, because they said that was dangerous for the congregation. Using instruments made the composers to write down the music. However, they also used to improvise. The instrumentation were plucked strings instruments and keyboard, like the organ. There are three types of composition. Adopt the piece from the vocal works, piece based on improvisation, and piece based on narration. Now we can hear this instrumental music. The concept of orchestra didn't exist yet, so no have a specific on the score, and the pieces were according different meanings. Dance. Dance were one of the favorite entertainments of the nobility. The phases have to be regular, so the movements were clear. It is based on symmetric phases, strong rhythm, and frequent repetition. There are two types of dance. Dance pairs and the origin of ballet. Dance pair, this is characterized by two pairs that the ones that of the stem is a binary rhythm and slow tempo, and the second with spins, jump, faster rhythm. The famous combination of the first leg is called pavane. And the second step, Goliath. Here, at the 15th century, it was master appeared to teach and writing the choreography. The origin of ballet. It was developed as an art under same strict rules, with the connection of dramatic art course causing the introduction of dance into the theatre. Dance theatre will now are today's ballets. The first ballet of the history was Ballet Magdalene dance in the court of Henry III, held in the wedding ceremony between the Duke of Johnson and Margarina de Lorena.
The Baroque was a period of artistic style that began around the 17th century in Rome, Italy, and spread through Europe. The word Baroque means a period of irregular shape and transmits exaggerated motions. The Baroque era was a period of political, economic, social, and cultural and artistic transformations which had an important influence on art. The 30 Years' War, Protestants versus Catholic, had an important influence in music and arts. The reduction in population and devastation brought by this war changed the way of thinking of people. While the Renaissance was an era of readiness and optimism, where they trust in nature and humans, the Baroque was an era of pessimistic view of life and disappointments, where they didn't trust in nature and humans. The Renaissance shows taste for balance, serenity and harmony, exaltation of life and idealism. Baroque shows taste for exaggeration, exaltation of death and realism. A good example of these thoughts is chiaroscuro, which is a strong contrast of light and shadow. Painters also broke with the Renaissance canon of beauty by using a greater degree of naturalism and creating diagonal composition. The principal patrons were the Catholic Church, which used art and music to promote its doctrines against Protestantism, the absolute monarchs, who displayed their power through art, and the wealthy bourgeoisie, who demonstrate their economic success and standard of living by commissioning and collecting art. Baroque was an era characterized by philosophical rationalism, which means the use of reason to understand reality. In this time of reason, the music and art had a clear function: move the affects, the emotions, and spiritual movements. The transmission of emotions was originated through the theory of emotions and rhetoric. In vocal terms, the music was concentrated in poetry, as its purpose is to strengthen the transmission of meaning and feelings associated with the word. The best example about the taste and aesthetics of this period is the opera, a fusion of poetry, music, and theatre. As I told before, Baroque had different patrons, so the style was not an homogeneous style. Distinctions are drawn between the religious Baroque style, which is a symbol of the Catholic Counter-Reformation promoted by the papacy. An example is the baldachin of St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican, the courtly Baroque style, which was more classical and supported by the absolute monarchs. An example is the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles, and the bourgeois Baroque style, which was a secular and intimate, characteristics of the Lutheran and Calvinist regions, and which was aimed at a bourgeois market. An example is the Gallery of Cornelis van der Kest by William van Hecht. Architecture has sense of movement. Their main characteristics are the oval medallion, curved pediments, and curved entablature. An example of architecture is the facade of the Church of St. Charles at the Four Fountains. Sculptures has imbalance. In Baroque sculpture, asymmetry and open compositions were predominant features. And examples are the sculpture of Apollo and Daphne and Exasti of Saint Teresa. And in Baroque painting, the main characteristics was the use of chiaroscuro. And an example is the Calling of Saint Matthew by Caravaggio and the Descent from the Cross by Rubens.
Baroque music style. In this period, comparing with the Renaissance, have many changes. The single melody took importance and the melody changed from a polyphonic to an accompanied. The single most important achievement of Baroque music was the invention of the opera. That was a song stage drama set to music which usually plays continuously throughout the performance. The first great opera composer was Claudio Monteverdi, who developed older models into a dramatic music style. The rhythm. This includes the monodic style, which indicate that each note values represent the same relation to the beat. This new style includes simple and compound meters, note values, and have a continuous rhythmic drive. Melody. Baroque architecture allowed a continuous melodic expansion. The same melodic motif was developed, and the whole modes system was simplified to the major and minor notes. The change dramatically in Baroque as composer began experimenting with a single melodic idea and also long complicated melodies. The texture also have some changes from counterpoint to a simple style based on a single line melody. The harmonic system grew simple, and the establishment of major-minor tonality. Another function was the dominant and the subdominant, that creates an harmonic tension into the tonic chords. The monodic style began including whole techniques but in a functionally harmonic system. The best example of a greater composer was Johann Sebastian Bach, who created one of the greater pieces of music ever composed, that was called the Chaconne. And it was a spiritual powerful piece, emotionally powerful and perfectly structurally. This piece was composed for a solo of a violin and is one of the longest and most challenging entirely solo pieces composed for an instrument. The most characteristic Baroque texture is known as basso continuo. It is normally played by a bass line player and a harmony played by a keyboard that supports the melody line.
The musical genres of the Baroque period are divided into two parts, vocal music and instrumental music. In the vocal music there are also two types, the performance music, the opera, and the religious vocal music. The performance music marked the change from the Renaissance period to the Baroque era. The first big opera was the Orfeo, by Claudia Monteverdi, in 1607. The new genre is a dramatic work that combines text, called libretto, and a musical score that includes orchestra, chorus, and soloists. We can distinguish between two different opera parts, instrumental parts, the overture, the introduction, and interludes, the links between parts. Also the singing parts, the chorus and soloist. Depending on the solo style, we can distinguish between aria, the expressive melodies for solo with an emotive text and generally with the da capo structure, and recitative, the claim style used in passages with a fast dramatic action. Then are the opera types. The evolution of this genre will give rise to two main kinds of operas. Opera seria, that was a highly refined form with mythological or heroic topics. Opera buffa. It was at first characterized by everyday settings, local dialects, and simple vocal writing. The development of this genre adopted the language of each country and replaced the recitatives with spoken dialogues. Then, the religious vocal music. The religious vocal music continues having a great importance during the Baroque period. Besides the motet, the mass, and the choral, that were musical forms coming from the Renaissance. We also find new religious music like cantata, a vocal composition with an instrumental accompaniment and often containing more than one movement, including chorus, arias, and recitatives. Depending on the content, we can find profane and religious cantatas. Oratorio is a large musical composition including an orchestra, a choir, and soloists. Passion is a musical composition reflecting the suffering of Jesus leading up to the crucifixion. The instrumental music. During this time, instrumental music became just as important as vocal music. New changes occurred in the instrumental world, like the mechanical and technological improvements to instruments that started to develop into the instruments that we know today. For example, the development of the violin family, which occurred at the end of the 16th. It will establish the basis of the modern orchestra. The main instrumental music forms are suite. It is an ordered set of instrumental pieces, unified by key and consisting of dances called suite de danses. The suite de dances will contain the following sections: prelude, allemande, courant, sarabande, intermezzi, jig. Then, the sonata, a piece played as opposed to a cantata, a piece sung, and it is divided into 4 contrasting movements with different tempo and texture: lento, fugue, allegro, homophonic lento, and allegro. The concerto. The term comes from concertare, to join 2 different things. We can distinguish between concerto grosso, opposition between a group of soloists and the orchestra. Then is the concerto a solo, for one instrument in continuous dialogue with the orchestra. Finally, it's the fugue, that is the most important characteristic musical form at the end of the Baroque period. The fugue is a contrapuntal composition in 2 or more voices, built on a theme that is introduced at the beginning in imitation and recurs frequently in the course of the composition.